Welcome to the Reflections Cast, where we invite you to join us in an exploration of the teachings of our dad, Skip Ross. In each episode, we will listen to a talk or lecture from Skip, and then discuss what we might be able to apply to our daily lives and reflect on how they can inspire us to grow and change. We hope to continue his legacy and join our listeners in finding new insights and perspectives. Here's episode 4, Goal Setting, the Negative Quandary. Well, hey guys, I'm Steven.
And I'm Melody.
And this is the Reflections Cast. Welcome. We've had a couple of really stellar episodes where Melody has taken all the questions that I've had about these episodes with Skip and given us some great ways of interpreting it, applying it, understanding it, and I love it. So we're going to get into a brand new episode here. I hope you guys are excited. I hope you're ready. And I hope that you're also giving us some feedback. We want to hear from you guys.
Yeah, we definitely do. And we're really grateful for the feedback that we are getting. Thank you guys for listening, for letting us know how much you're enjoying it. It really does mean a lot. Please feel free to send in any questions or ideas as well as the encouragement, because we'd really love to serve this community in the best way possible. So thank you guys. Truly for all the encouragement. I do have to give a shout out to our number one encourager, which I'm sure you'll all be very surprised to know is none other than my mom, Susan. She loves the podcast a lot and has a lot of wonderful things to say. So thank you, Susan, for all the listening and the encouragement. And we're glad that everyone's enjoying it. And I know we're all getting a lot out of it by listening to Skip. So thank you guys.
Absolutely. And just like every episode, we're going to do our intro, then we're going to listen to Skip. Then I've got some questions for Melody at the end. But I did want to just mention again something else that we are working on with Circle A called the Pioneer Circle. It had an awesome launch. People are really excited about this. There's some really cool content that's being created for that. So if you are a fan of Skip, if you are a fan of what we are doing on this podcast right now, please go check that out. Melody, can you tell them a little bit more about what we are doing with Pioneer Circle? Because it's really cool, guys. You need to check it out.
Yeah, it's really going awesome. We just finished our first week of official content that we're sending out to everyone, and we're getting lots of great feedback, but we are still tweaking things and learning and figuring out exactly what delivery methods are going to be best and what's going to be the most useful for everyone. So please send in your feedback. Which is no small task.
I mean, yeah. There's a lot of different people out there.
There are. And truly, this was nothing more than an imaginative dream less than 3 months ago. So the fact that it's reality with an app and videos and subscribers and all of it is really exciting. Mm-hmm. But we're working towards our goal of 100 families. That's the number that we love to see to really, get things in a place where we can work on developing our app more and just developing some other content that's really going to serve the community in the best way. So we would love anyone listening on this podcast to be part of our inaugural 100 families. So if you're interested, go check it out. You can find it at circleacamp.com/pioneers. There's some videos there that will kind of give you an idea of exactly everything that we offer, but we've got coaching calls, we've got an app, we've got multiple videos coming from a bunch of the leadership team from Circle A every week. So it's really cool, and we would love for everybody to check it out for sure.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Well, we are going to transition now into our time with Skip. This is a continuation of the goal setting series that he was doing a number of years ago at our volunteer week. And it is all about reasons why people don't change. And this little segment really goes deep into something he terms the negative quandary, which I think you'll all enjoy. So let's listen in.
I believe we left off, we were talking about why people don't change and the antidote. Some people don't change because they're out of practice. Some don't change because they rationalize. They tell themselves stories, use Kushners, and we finally came to the conclusion they just lie to themselves. And then some don't change because they've had an ineffective strategy. There is a fourth area that I would suggest to you that is a possibility for another reason why people don't change. People get into what I have for many years called a negative quandary. It's that downward spiral. And people slide down that spiral into what I have termed the slough of despond. You all know about the slough of despond? It's about right there. When you get all the way to the bottom of the slide. And when you are headed down the negative quandary slide to the bottom, you don't change. You just keep going unless you do something to change that process. It's important to understand then that there are factors that play a role in all of our lives. And we might call that process that goes from pain to motivation to action to return and back to pain. Let me give you a little more detail on that. Pain, many have said, leads to motivation. I'm reminded of the story of the old farmer whose dog was on the porch and the dog just kept yiping. And he just kept, it was not a real bark, it was just a painful yipe. And a friend of the farmer was sitting there watching this dog just continue to complain and complain and complain. And he said to the farmer, "What's wrong with your dog?" He said, "Well, there's a nail in the floor right there he's laying on, and it hurts." The friend said, "Well, why doesn't the dog get up and move?" He said, "I guess it doesn't hurt enough yet." So, pain leads to motivation. If it's not enough pain, we don't do anything about it. It just kind of keeps going on. A person hits a threshold. The problem causes such a significant amount of pain that they feel pressure to take action to change it. Now, is there a better way to handle that? Probably so. But a great majority of people operate on this pain to motivation factor of life. And when it hurts enough, we do something about it. When the doctor says you've got a month to live, a year to live, there are people who will suddenly start doing things they should have been doing 5 years ago, 10 years ago. When pain becomes sufficient, it begins to motivate. Motivation then turns to action. As a person takes action, they make progress toward eliminating some aspects of the problem. They lose 10 of the 40 pounds they need to lose, or they lose 20 of the 50 pounds they need to lose. That was the goal, and they're motivated now, and they've begun doing something about it, and that lessens the intensity of the pain. When the intensity of the pain is reduced, the motivation to complete the change is lessened, and motivation to completely resolve the problem much of the time is lost. With a lack of pain to drive the person any longer, gradually they return to the old behavior. And results lead to loss of motivation, return to the past actions, and return to the problem. Why do people go up and down in terms of weight loss? That's a big part of it. Why do people go up and down in terms of relationships? You know, if suddenly there's an explosion in a relationship and a person says, wow, this thing's about to blow apart if I don't do something, and suddenly they talk better, they listen better, they are more attentive, they do more nice things, they do things that they should be doing, and the relationship begins to improve, but then they go back to doing what they were doing before. We could talk about it in all sorts of areas of life. The problem returns and remains. So for that reason, because so many people have been through that kind of negative quandary, the downward slide, often enough, they don't want to take the energy to change to get out of that pit and begin to build their life. And so they try to remain at some stage of comfort, even though it may be in the slough of despond. There are things that will help us to change. I would talk with you this evening about 6 steps. Step number 1, get emotionally charged. Emotionally charged. This is all about becoming honest with ourselves. Refusing to use the rationalizations that we made reference to the last time we were together. Refusing to compare yourself with others in order to make yourself feel better, or sometimes to make yourself feel worse. The process of comparison with others is a stupid process. Now, there's a nicer way to say that. It lacks wisdom, but it's just plain stupid to compare oneself with others. And yet I ask you, when is the last time in the last 24 hours that you actually did compare yourself with somebody else? It is something that goes on in the life of most people on an ongoing basis at an almost totally unconscious level. We think that somehow that is what we're supposed to do in order to feel better, or sometimes in order to make them feel worse, which we assume will obviously make us feel better. It doesn't work that way. You probably already found that out. And in our more reasoned time together, when we think through that process, most of us would agree that we've never felt better by making somebody else feel worse. There sometimes is that emotional rush when you get the best of somebody who's been really bad to you, and there's that feeling of, now I got you. But it's not a permanent way to make one feel better about themselves. And when we then begin to consider how we feel as a result of what we did, we generally will see the error of the way and therefore feel worse about ourselves. I guess a part of this process of getting emotionally charged is to really understand what the problem is. Really identify, own the problem. Make it yours. Again, we live in a society that is a victim society, and others do things to them. It's never their fault. They never own the problem. It's always somebody else's problem directed at me. Someone has said, get identified with the problem, and if necessary, make a worst-case scenario that will take you to action, get you to take action. In my opinion, it's better to have a best-case scenario. I am far more inclined to think in terms of, if I take action on this and I do what I know is right to be done, what is the best thing I could expect from this? And I guess I think that everybody ought to feel that way and operate that way. I just know from observation and thousands of hours of counseling with people that many people are more motivated to get into action to do something when they began to consider the worst case scenario. If I keep doing what I'm doing, this is where it's going to take me, and I don't want to go there. Therefore, I better do something about this. I would prefer to take that other approach that says, I know what I need to do, and when I do what I'm supposed to do, it will take me here, and that's where I want to go. Therefore, I will take action. They both are designed to get us to where we need to be, solving the problem. But one is a more negative approach, and the one is a more positive approach. If you're not emotionally involved and take ownership of the problem, I have a problem. I've owned it. It's mine. I made a mistake. I have a problem. It's okay to have a problem. It's just not okay to say that from now until you die. Once you've owned the problem, then there's a process that begins to take place. Part of which is to surround yourself with people who have what you want or are the kind of persons you want to be. You and I have the option to choose the people with whom we associate. Even if you work at a job where you may not have the option there to pick and choose who you work with, seeing people who have the kind of orientation towards people that you would like to have can get you emotionally involved in the process of becoming like that. If you want to have a better attitude, associate with people who have a better attitude. If you want to be a more joyful person, be around people who are more joyful. If you want to be encouraged and be an encourager, associate with the encouragers. They are all over the place. They are obvious. And you and I have the choice as to whether or not we move in that circle or we are intimidated by that circle.
Okay. And that's the recording with Skip. I certainly enjoyed it. I think that there's a lot to unpack there. Melly, do you have some notes for us on this lesson that we could listen to kind of get the most out of it?
Yeah, again, I mean, such good stuff. So important to listen to and think about. So it's always good. It's always good to hear. So yeah, I mean, I have a few notes of some things that kind of stood out to me in that one. The first is this idea of the negative quandary, which is really important. Like, I'm really glad that he brings this out as a specific other reason why people don't change, even though it could sort of be combined with some of the other reasons that we talked about before. This is a particular pattern that I know a lot of us, probably all of us, in some space or another, can fall into, where, we feel a pain, so we're motivated to do something about it. We take an action, we alleviate the pain enough that we stop taking the action, and then the pain returns. And so certainly, if we do that long enough, we're kind of just stuck in a cycle, and we're not changing. So I really love that he brought that into this conversation. And I think a lot of the steps that he brings up, steps towards change, can help us with these negative quandary situations. And they can also help us with all of the other reasons why we don't change. So yeah, I loved that part of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, of course, another thing that stood out in this recording was the whole comparison with others is stupid part. Dad didn't use that word a lot. Like, so when he used it, you knew that he meant it. And I absolutely would say, if someone asked me, what did he most frequently call stupid, it was definitely comparison. Like, that is a statement he said all the time. And he was so right. Like, I really wish I had the little Skip Ross on my shoulder reminding me of that all day, every day, because it's really a temptation in so many parts of our lives to compare. So I did learn so much from him about this, but I want to keep learning about this. I will say, though, when I listened to this recording, the girls, my girls and I have recently started taking a Taekwondo class together. And it's a class that's for teens and adults. And I was looking for something fitness that we could do together, and they're young teens. So there wasn't a lot of options in the area. It's mostly either teens or adults. But I found a Taekwondo class that was teens and adults, and I don't necessarily care about Taekwondo as my particular sport. I prefer running, but I wanted to do something with them. So we went. Well, it says it's a teen adult class, but really it's teens and then like maybe 2 or 3 adults at any given class. So I'm going into this class as almost 40-year-olds with all these teenagers. And clearly, they're in a little bit different fitness shape than I am. Not, like I have good cardio, but like, for Taekwondo, you have to be super flexible. Like you have to have a lot of hip mobility. Okay. And that is a particular weakness of mine. I don't have a lot of hip mobility. So we're doing these stretches and I know that I am like not doing great. Okay. But I thought of Dad, like as I'm in this Taekwondo class, I'm hearing Dad in my head, like comparison with others is stupid because I realized I'm like comparing myself with these 13-year-olds and like, well, that is stupid. I'm not 13. I'm 40. Why do I think that my body could do what they could do? Yeah. So it was like, I did have like a moment of like, you know what? I'm just going to go in this class and I'm just going to have fun. And I don't care if I look dumb and I don't care if I'm letting these kids hit me. I'm kicking these children. I go in this class and I kick children. But like, I've just decided I don't care. I'm just going to be the adult and I'm just going to have fun and I'm going to do all the work that they do and I'm going to have fun. And so it was like I was proud of myself for my choice to not get stuck in comparison. And so I think Dad would be proud too.
That's awesome. I think that's a great example of not comparing. Let's see. So do we want to get into some questions about this stuff? Because I really love this point. I love the idea of the negative quandary because it does encapsulate this cycle of thought that you can get into that really is a troubling part of getting out of a problem. Most people get into these states and they think, okay, well, I've hit that pain threshold. I'm going to fix my problem now. And they don't fix the problem. And then they get locked into this idea that no matter what they do, they will always fail again. And so why even try? Yeah, it happens. I see it all the time with like weight loss stuff. But there's so many other things like in jobs and with relationships and so many other things. So it's not just a great encapsulation, but it is certainly applicable. Yep. So I do have some questions. Well, just a quick discussion point. It's not so much a question, but it's more just about this idea of it being a negative cycle pattern of pain to motivation, motivation to action, action to return, and then back to pain. And I guess some of my questions revolve around like, does it have to be that way? Obviously, he gives 6 steps, he says, but I just don't feel satisfied with the steps that he gives in terms of alleviating that cycle and really getting out of it. And I think he does flesh it out a bit more in the next lessons, but I guess my questions revolve around the negative quandary quite a bit, which is, so the first one, what is a better response to pain or your pain threshold being tested? Is it lowering that threshold? Because where this question is coming from is we're always going to experience pain. And we don't want to get stuck in this negative cycle. So where do we intercept it to change it towards the positive? Is it at the point of pain? Should we be more sensitive to pain so that we can hop on it and change our response to it quickly? Is it increasing our action and holding ourselves accountable to that action? So is it just that we're not trying hard enough? Are we not getting emotionally? What was the term he used? Emotionally charged, right? Not getting emotionally charged enough about that action to really lock us into those responses. And then also just, can we find some examples? Can you think of some healthier methods of dealing with that pain, that response to pain, or that response to that negative quandary cycle?
Yeah, that was several really good questions. All right.
I'm sorry. I'm not really breaking it up, am I?
No, that's all right. Let me think a second. I mean, yeah. So essentially what you're asking is, where do we disrupt this cycle so that we don't end up sliding into the pit of despair?
Right.
So honestly, I think any of those answers could be right. And it may depend a little bit on your certain situation. Like, I think there are some situations where it is at the pain point where if you intercept that pain earlier and do something earlier, then you can probably quickly find a resolution to the problem and not get stuck in a cycle. So I do think that can potentially be a solution. In my mind, it probably has more to do with the action place of it, because from what it sounds like is going on with most people in the cycle, the action that they're doing is successful, but because it's successful and they feel the relief of the pain, then they stop doing it and then they go back, right? Yeah. So in my mind, when I hear about this, what immediately comes to my mind as the solve is habits. And I know I probably bring up habits every episode because I am a little bit obsessed with them, but I think that's a good thing. Yeah. I think I learned that from Dad. So that's what I've learned in my life. Like, I need to do the actions whether or not I'm feeling the pain, because if I don't do those actions, I know I'll feel the pain again. And like, while I agree with Dad's idea about getting emotionally charged and like, being all in for the victory over this thing or whatever, I found that there are some habits where I don't need to be emotionally charged. I'm just going to do that habit because it's part of my life. Whether or not I have any feelings about taking my vitamins every morning, I'm simply going to do that every morning. Whether or not I have a feeling about going for a walk outside and praying every morning, I'm just going to do it. And I'm doing it because it's built in part of my life, because I've done the negative quandary enough times to know that if I'm not doing these healthy habits, I'm going to end up in a not great mental state. And when I'm in a not great mental state, everything feels more painful. So if I'm doing my healthy habits, I don't get to that place, then I do have the higher pain tolerance, et cetera, et cetera. So to me, I would say habits are probably the best place to intercept this, but I think you could intercept it at every place, whether it's finding a better motivation than pain, whether it's intercepting pain earlier, whether it's keeping your action going longer. But I do think intercepting the cycle is good, because otherwise we can get really stuck in it. So, yeah.
Do you think until you've experienced the pain a little bit, you're not sensitive enough to apply those habits correctly?
Yeah,
or do you
probably.
think that most people, if they're just advised like, hey, no, you need to exercise this many times a week, that they'll lock into it and they'll just never experience the pain of?
I think we need to be motivated by something. So whether we're motivated by pain or fear or love or reward or whatever it is that's motivating us to do the habit, something's going to motivate us to do the habit. Otherwise, we're going to stay in our comfort zone. So, yeah.
Well, I think that does lead well into the next question. I mean, I guess all the questions kind of revolve around this. I do love, whenever Dad says the word stupid, my ears perk up because he says it so infrequently. But when he says it, he means it. And it's always for emphasis. And so when he brings up the idea of comparison and to bring up the idea of it being stupid to compare, I think that it's something worth revisiting and talking a bit more about. So my question revolving around comparison is, how do you have any measurement of success or failure without some sort of comparison? Meaning, as he talked about earlier with keeping up with the Joneses, if someone is not measuring up to their peer group, the people that, they are seeing on a daily basis. Obviously, you touched on it with your summary, but do you feel like if there was nobody else in the class, that you would still not feel like, well, but I still need to hit this next stage to compare with the chart on the wall that says this is my next move that I need to do? Is there some level of comparison that's healthy? Is all comparison with peers negative? And does it always hurt us or others to compare?
Yeah. No, that's a good question too. I wish Dad was here to answer this question. I would really like to hear what would just come rolling off of his mind to this question, because you're right. Like, look at any competitive sport. Like, you can't know if you're good or bad if you're not competing and comparing with your competitors, right? Mm-hmm. Or like you're saying, in the classroom or whatever. So, yeah, I think there is some sense in which comparison and competition have a place in the world, in terms of being successful in a particular field. I think what's stupid, according to Dad and the scriptures, is the posture of the heart and the perception of the mind to say, if I am less than X, I am worth less because of it. I think it's when we link our success in a given space to our worth, that's what's stupid. I think even without taking it that far, a lot of comparison, even when it does come to successful things, is stupid, because like I was saying in the Taekwondo thing, it would be, even if I'm not linking my human worth to my hip mobility, I still might feel discouraged if I'm looking at the 13-year-olds and wishing that I could do splits like they can do. But that's stupid, because they haven't lived 40 years. They haven't birthed children. They haven't run marathons. Like, their body hasn't done the things that I've done. So what foolishness would it be to try and compare their body to mine, right? So I do think there is a lot where, even in our fields of where we're working to grow and become and be successful, comparison can be stupid there. But I think the real danger is when you begin to link your worth to what you're comparing. I think the healthy part, like what is smart for me to do in Taekwondo is to compare to myself and to see, well, what could my hips do on day one? What can they do 4 weeks in? Because that's going to be some sort of measurement that's actually going to be helpful to me. Measuring against anyone else is not helpful or doesn't provide really any data. So I think as we can compare with ourselves, and I think that can help us to grow. But I will say, when we were just listening to the recording of Dad, and he asked the question about where have you compared yourself in the last 24 hours, I asked myself the question, as I do when I listen to Dad. I try and do what he's saying to do. So I asked myself the question, and I realized that today in church, I was singing. And I had the thought, man, I'm not as good as I used to be. And I had this thought in my mind. And even though I was comparing with myself, I was feeling like something less than, because my 40-year-old voice isn't the same as my 20-year-old voice. And so when he asked that question, it made me think, like, it's comparing with yourself can still be stupid if you try and link it to your worth. I've been reading a really good book called From Strength to Strength by Arthur C. Brooks. And it's a book about kind of moving into the second half of life and finding what he calls your second curve. So he talks about, our bodies and our minds are built for one thing for a certain amount of our life, but at some point, we do have certain skills, cognitive skills, physical skills, that eventually will start to decline. And if all of our purpose and our fulfillment and our success is linked to that single curve, we could have a difficult second half of life. But he talks about kind of getting on the second curve, which he calls, the first curve is like fluid intelligence, and he calls the second curve crystallized intelligence. And basically the crystallized intelligence is more cultivating purpose and cultivating relationships and kind of the growth of your essential self rather than just your skills or whatever. And it's been very helpful to me as I am closing in on the second half of life, maybe, to know, like, there is still a lot of growth and becoming that can continue throughout our lives. And Dad was an amazing example of that. So all that to say, I do think comparing with ourselves is the way to go in most cases, but I do think even that can be stupid if we're linking it to our worth. So
absolutely. I think that is a wonderful response. I think any response where as the response is happening, I ask a question and then you answer it in your subsequent response is a very good response. So I think that's great. And I think a good lesson for everyone to be thinking about. So here is the final question to bring a close to our time together, which is, why is it that fear is such a powerful motivator? And how is a positive outcome, as Skip says, a healthier method or the method that he prefers, even though he seems to openly admit that it's not always the strongest option. And how do we deal with that?
Yeah. No, that's a really good one. Dad did teach a lot about this. And we've touched on it a little bit about the motivators, the most powerful human motivators. I think fear, depending on what experts you talk to, I think fear is kind of a primal instinct, based on the earliest humans, this fight or flight response to danger. And it's hardwired into us, right? So I think it's a very primal response. And so therefore it motivates us. And I think that it kind of all probably comes back to this idea of the comfort zone, because in our comfort zone, we don't feel fear, right? So in our comfort zone, we're not motivated. But if at any point we feel fear, then we are motivated to get back to that comfort zone. So it's kind of like one of the buffers that kind of keeps us in that space. So when we're feeling fear, we want to move away from it. And so that's going to move us. Otherwise, it takes a lot for us to move, really, in any way. But if we are made uncomfortable, we're out of the comfort zone, we're going to move away. We're going to go back to what's comfortable. So I think that's a really big part of it. I think that, they talk about other motivators, pain, sort of linked to fear, but a little bit different. Reward, of course. And then love. Love is what Dad always talked about as the most powerful motivator. Again, depending on what experts you talk to, I think that the spirituality piece, depending on what you believe about the work of the enemy in the world and in our hearts, I think that's where a lot of fear comes from. And so, love is the antidote to that, but love is also its own motivation. So, yeah, fear is something to be dealt with like daily, for sure, because it doesn't really tend to motivate us to move in the direction of our growth. It motivates to move in the direction of our comfort. So
I love that. And there's a scenario that's bouncing around in my mind as you are responding, which is my son, surprisingly, is just having a lot of trouble staying in bed at night. Mm-hmm. And he's starting to get very fearful all of a sudden. And he's never had that kind of like real trouble of, having nightmares or anything like that. But he wakes up in the middle of the night and he runs down the hall and wants to get in mommy and daddy's bed. And so he's gone through all these different scenarios of, well, fear is the motivator to like get back to the comfort zone.
Yep.
So he's running back to parents. Yep. And then parents, I have said like, all right, well, tonight, if you stay in bed all night, even if you feel fear, you get a sticker on the chart. There's a little reward.
Yep.
Will that be enough of motivation to stay in bed tonight? Well, the next night runs around and nope, that was not enough of a motivator. Yep. He's back with us again. So we've just been responding with love. We understand. We walk you back, get you comfortable, and leave you back here because you gotta face that fear and dilute that motivation that it's pushing on you. I just think that's a neat little example of
Yeah,
what you're talking about.
It's exactly the example. And we live out the same scenario in our day-to-day adult lives that we do as kids. So yeah, it's part of being human, I think.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Melody. Again, another awesome set of responses. And I think we can all get a lot out of that lesson with Skip. If you guys have other things that you wanted more on in that lesson, we are getting down to the final session with Skip on goal setting in this particular series. So if you've got some questions or some things that stood out to you that you'd like more discussion on, leave us a voicemail on our Spotify page or leave us a comment. You can go over to YouTube and comment there or send us an email at thereflectionscast@gmail.com. Again, thank you, Melody. I think everyone really benefited from it. I know I did. And I think that's it for today. So thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah, guys, thanks so much. We enjoy being with you, and we'll see you next time.